I would now like to introduce today's presenters. Nishant Jeyanth is a member of the Business Process Services team and is responsible for leading Everest Group's marketing services offerings. Before joining Everest Group, Nishant worked with Thomson Reuters and KPMG, gaining rich experience in business transformation and growth strategies for firms across multiple industries. Darshita Lohiya is a senior analyst in Everest Group's business process services practice, who closely tracks developments in the marketing services landscape. She helps global marketing services providers enhance their value proposition to their customers and refine business strategies as part of ongoing strategic engagements. David Rickard is a partner at Everest Group, leading the global customer experience management services and trust and safety and marketing services. Before joining Everest Group in 2021, David held leadership roles in outsourcing and customer experience. And with that, I would like to turn things over to David.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, as Raphael said. I'm really excited to be sharing with you today some of the insights from our recent CMO survey that we've only literally just completed, so it's hot off the press. We got responses from nearly 600 CMOs, so really good sample of what's happening in this really fast-paced and interesting area. So what we're going to cover today is we're going to look at some of the complexities in the current marketing landscape. Then we're going to look at the provider landscape and see how that's fragmented and where that's going. Then talk about complexity and the volume of data that people have to handle in the CMO role and their teams. And then starting to think about some of the emergence of the multiple marketing channels that we're facing, some which are well known, some that are more forward-looking and more exciting to think about as we look at this space developing. And then you can't do a webinar without talking about generative AI. So we are going to be touching on generative AI and how we see it really impacting the marketing landscape. At the end, we will hopefully have some time for questions. So if you've got questions, as Raphael said, please put them in the Q&A tab. We'll do our best to answer them. Any we don't get to answer, we'll follow up afterwards. And any of the pre-submitted questions that you've done as well, then we will also try and come back to you on each of those if we don't get to answer them live. So let's get into the content, because I think that's where the real interesting discussion is. So Nishant, let's sort of dive into this. What are some of the complexities we're seeing in the marketing landscape? Maybe you can start by taking us through that.
Thanks, David. So let me just start off by painting a picture of the overall landscape right now. I have a slide in front of all of you, and to be very honest, I think the word that turns up most often on the slide is fragmented across different elements that we're looking at. But broadly, that's what the marketing landscape today signifies. It's a highly fragmented landscape in terms of your providers, highly fragmented in terms of your technology. There is a huge amount of data which is coming in from different channels, and marketers don't particularly know what they're doing with that data. Uncertain macroeconomic conditions across the board. I know we've been saying this for a while, and unfortunately we are in that rut. It's going to continue for a while longer. We're seeing, again, coming back to the data point, but from a different angle, we're looking at a lot of different marketing channels come up, all of them giving in a lot of different data, a lot of different customer insights, and a marketer needs to handle all of this together. There's a lot of issues in terms of transparency across different organizations. Marketing, sales, customer experience, all of them have always operated in different silos. So bringing in that collaboration across all of them has always been very difficult. Your customer is changing quite drastically year on year. And I'm sure if you Google Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, you're going to find completely different thought papers, each one of them changing their insights on a quarterly basis, because that's how fast we're seeing this market evolve. And as a cherry on top of all of this conversation, we have generative AI, which is just transforming a lot of the marketing ecosystem that we are looking at today. Now, when we looked at a lot of the questions that came in before the webinar started off, one of the stakeholders had actually asked the question, why now? And it's a very fair question, because we are in June and we are turning around and saying, what are the priorities looking like? Well, to be honest, marketing is also coming out of a sort of a rut. When we look at 2023, it wasn't a bad year. We saw a lot of budgets getting unlocked, maybe not at the same levels as pre-pandemic, but it's still a significantly strong year. 2024 is again a very, very strong year. We're seeing a lot of deal making happening in the first quarter. The second quarter continues to be quite strong. We're seeing a lot of marketing events which are coming up. More from a consumption point of view, we have the Olympics. We have a lot of different events that are already going on. We're seeing political spending going up across the board as well. So there is a lot to unpack over here. And what we wanted to do was turn the lens over to the consumer of everything that we're talking about, the CMO. And we're happy to have about 600 respondents on everything that we've spoken about. So to be very honest, very complex landscape. And it's a great time to be a marketeer or a person in marketing research. So with
Sorry.
that,
Yeah, sorry, Nishant. Everyone has to be on mute at some point in the call, and today it was me, so apologies for that. But yeah, I think one of the things to call out as well is that we're going to be showcasing just a very small snippet of all the insights that we've generated from this survey. So obviously we can't do everything in an hour, and also obviously we'd like to generate some conversations with the audience, and so we are only going to be showing certain key elements. We've got a lot more data behind this. So if you're interested, then obviously you know where we are and you can always reach out, and we're happy to have more conversations on this. So as we think about moving forward, one of the things that we saw from the survey is a very fragmented marketing service provider landscape. And this is a topic very close to my heart. Spent a number of years in sourcing, worked at Microsoft, leading a sourcing team, looking at provider landscapes. And we always go through that cycle of, do we diversify? Do we consolidate? So we've seen a really fragmented picture here from a CMO perspective. So if we move to the poll question, I would like to get some audience participation if I could. We're going to open a poll in a minute, really. We'd love to understand from you, if you're managing providers in this landscape, how many providers are you managing? Is it between 1 to 4, 5 to 8, 17 to 20? You can see all the numbers there on the screen. Are you managing more than 20? So again, from a marketing perspective, to deliver your outcomes, how many people are you having to deal with? And what we'll share is what we saw from the survey to see how this compares. So again, thank you for those who are already participating. We've got about 30 odd people participating. We've got nearly 70 on the call. I appreciate not everyone is managing the CMO portfolio, so some people may not be able to answer, but the more people answer, the better. So maybe if we just give it 20 seconds more, just to see if there's any stragglers coming into the responses. So what it's looking like actually is the numbers are looking a bit different. So we can close the poll now. I think we can close the poll. Interestingly, we see the numbers a little bit differently. So what we've seen from the very quick poll we've just done here, 32% of you are managing between 1 and 4, and 39% of you are managing between 5 and 8. Actually, no one is managing between 17 and 20, interestingly, and only 2 of you are having to manage more than 20. So slightly different picture to what we saw from the actual CMO survey. So again, that could be lots of reasons to that. The picture's evolved slightly, although the survey is very recent. Could be the type of people we've got on this call. But if we move to the next slide, what we can see is what we actually saw from the survey. So what we can see actually is when you ask the CMOs how many service providers you're having to deal with to achieve your desired outcomes, what we saw is that actually, when you add the numbers up, more than 50% of the CMOs we speak to are dealing with more than 12. So as you can see there, 15% are dealing between 13 and 16, 21% are dealing with 17 to 20. And that's why I was surprised that there was 0 of 17 to 20 in our small poll we did there. And actually 19% are dealing with more than 20. So actually, as I said, more than 50% of the 600 are having to deal with at least 12 service providers in this marketing mix. So interesting to see how this is developing. So obviously the question is, what are people doing about it? So if we think about moving to the next slide, what we can see is that actually, and to set some background on this, what we've seen when we talk about broad business process outsourcing, or BPS, business process services, we've actually seen quite a different shift. So During the pandemic, people were diversifying their supplier base, as you would expect. When we came out of the pandemic, everyone went and consolidated because there was a massive focus on actually, well, we've added a lot of suppliers to give us continuity of supply during the pandemic. We now need to consolidate. But actually, when we did our key issue study at the end of 2023, from a BPS perspective, and asked people, what are your plans? What we saw there is that 66% were saying there's no changes to their service mix, but they may rebalance the portfolio. 28% said there's not going to be any changes at all, and only 6% were going to consolidate, whereas I think the previous year it was probably 30 or 40%. So a big shift. But when we look at it specifically for marketing, and this is the results from the recent CMO survey, what we can see is that actually 67% of respondents are saying they're actually looking to consolidate and rationalize their service provider portfolio, which is a really big shift. So what we do expect is there are going to be some major changes in this, and there's a lot of work being cut out for CMOs and their teams into getting them into the right place. But a lot of focus in terms of changing their service providers or consolidating the service provider mix. So Nishant, why don't you take us a little bit more detail in terms of what we think actually the predictions for the future are in terms of the CMOs. And this is the format we're going to follow. So we've got some predictions and then we've also got some data to back that up. So what's our thinking in terms of the predictions?
Thanks, David. And if you look at this picture, I don't think it's a particularly optimistic picture, because when you look at the 12%, I could actually break that down and tell you that out of those 12%, the ones who are not planning on changing their service provider mix, 5% of them actually told us that they've already finished rationalizing their portfolio. So if I had to actually look at these numbers, I'd say about 94% of them are actually in some shape or form trying to figure out where their service provider mix is going to land up at the end of this conversation. Now, while it's a gloomier picture on a broader horizon, this kind of indicates a very clear mandate from the CMO at this point of time. They're looking for simplification. And while we're going to see a lot of losers, we are going to see some winners, and those winners are going to win big. Because what this data indicates is a clear call to action to all of the service providers out there. Over the last few years, we've seen a lot of fragmented conversations coming out in the marketing ecosystem, wherein someone does part A of the overall work and then hands it over to someone else, and so on and so forth. When you're talking about something which is in the Fortune 500s, they're dealing with 20 plus vendors at the minimum. And trying to figure this out is becoming a significant problem for all of them. So what we believe is, first off, the total experience revolution that we've been hearing about in bits and pieces is no longer coming. It's here. And your CMO is going to start looking at that conversation end to end. He wants to craft a seamless journey across all of their digital touch points, bring all of their fragmented data together, get their customer persona information into that mix, and start looking at changing sentiment to bring out those game-changing insights that today they don't really have access to. Now, we've seen a lot of transformation in the marketing ecosystem till date. We're going to continue to see it. But what we're seeing is all of that data coming together, all of those purchase decisions becoming stronger, and your CMO purchase decisions in itself are going to start switching in the near to medium term. The other thing that we are going to see is the overall battle between your marketing specialists versus generalists. So till date, we've seen a lot of niche firms that have been focusing on very, very small parts of this overall value chain in the marketing side. Now, what we're going to start seeing is CMOs looking for strategic partners who are going to enable their growth story across all of their touch points, across all of their activities in the marketing ecosystem. So what they're going to start looking at is, can I actually trust someone to take on, say, 10% of my overall marketing conversation, and then maybe probably just give me updates, strategic conversations, etc. But everything else is hands off. We're not really seeing that today. All of the feedback that we're getting on the service provider ecosystem indicates that they're looking at service providers more from operational lenses, and very, very few of them from a strategic lens. What has to happen is that has to pivot towards more strategic relationships. And as we start moving in that direction, all of the niche players will need to start figuring out how they could start providing a wider ambit in terms of coverage of the marketing ecosystem. Now, this could be on the basis of acquisitions and or internal talent development, Or it could be something wherein they start collaborating with different organizations and start providing that end-to-end experience, because the CMO is no longer purchasing piecemeal. They're actually looking for someone who's going to provide everything.
Yeah, Nishant, just one point just to make on this as well. I think when we often talk about this stuff, we talk about it from the impact on service providers. But what I would also say is the way you can look at this is if you're a CMO on this webinar listening in, it's also what your peers and your fellow CMOs and your competitors are doing from this perspective as well. So sometimes it sounds like we're aiming the discussion at the service providers, but I think you can also use it as, if I'm a CMO, this is what my peers are doing and how I could be thinking about doing it differently if I'm not already doing it that way. So you can see it from both perspectives, both from a service provider and a CMO perspective.
Yep, agreed, 100%. So moving on, the next trend that we'd like to discuss is the volume and complexity of customer data. We've seen a lot of different channels. We've seen a lot of marketing transformation, and we know data is the new oil. So Darshita, can you shed a little bit of light in terms of how this conversation is evolving?
Yeah, sure, Nishant. So what we basically did was we asked CMOs about their immediate top of the mind concerns with respect to data. And what you see on the slide are the top complexities around data that CMOs are currently dealing with. But before we start, let's just address how comical the result is, because on the one hand, the top concern is the immense volume of data, while right next to it, on the other hand, is the concern around collection and consolidation of usable first-party data. So essentially what it means is that availability of data is not really a problem. The real struggle is to capture, consolidate, and convert that data into actionable insights. Now let's again dive into why is that not happening as it should. Again, it's funny because the answer lies in the next two concerns: lack of skilled and lack of technology for data analytics and reporting. Now, interestingly, the global marketing analytics tools and solutions market is actually capped at $2.9 billion as of 2023. So again, availability of tools is not a problem. What's exactly lacking is the underlying infrastructure or the fundamental connecting blocks between these teams and tools to paint that coherent picture of the overall market in terms of trends, customer personas, and all other insights. So it's all coming together in the sense that concerns 3 and 4 are essentially leading to concerns 1 and 2, and everything is interlinked. However, one interesting thing to note is that while the first 4 are forming a coherent story, when you look at data security, it's sort of tricky to configure that one. And Nishant, I would really like you to shed some light on that one.
Thanks, Darshita. So I agree with the picture that you've painted, but I think the broad storyline that we're trying to paint on the slide is that marketing's tryst with data is far from over. Now, on one end of the spectrum, we're looking at data everywhere, not an insight to leverage, because customers have been giving them a lot of data. You've been getting data from first-party sources, second-party sources, third-party sources as well. And as this conversation starts to mature, a lot of CMOs today are struggling with trying to figure out how do they start collecting the right first-party information, and how do they start storing it so that they're able to create those golden records. The other thing that we're talking about, and I know it's a slightly catchy statement, probably not applicable because everyone's not looking for a job change right now, but think job security, think marketing analytics. Honestly speaking, about 60% of CMOs as of this point of time are looking at strengthening their talent in this particular bucket. So if you have rising stars, probably try holding on to them as much as possible. It's also a conversation in terms of how evergreen this market is going to be in terms of the amount of data that's coming in, because every second day we're looking at a brand new channel, a brand new platform that customers are starting to use, and they're going to start bringing in a lot more data than what we already have. We're going to circle back on that topic in a couple of minutes, but that's one more trend that we'd like to call out. Now, the third trend and the final one that we are looking at over here is what Darshita was indicating in terms of the regulatory landscape. Now, to be very honest, there is a huge amount of focus in terms of data security and privacy at a firm level, because we're seeing a lot of activities happen at that scale. You're seeing that strengthening across different business units altogether. However, in the marketing side, that is a priority. It's not probably the first priority over there, because marketeers are also looking at how do they leverage this information to bring out trends and to reach their end customers where they're actually making their purchase decisions. So what we expect is that in the near to medium term, because of the kind of traction that GenAI is bringing in, we are going to start seeing a much higher degree of regulatory scrutiny, and that's going to bring in the necessary urgency in the marketing side of the data conversation. Now, before I move on, I'd like to just remind everyone, our question bucket is open, and if you have any questions, please drop them in. I see a few already there, but feel free to do so.
Yeah, Nishant, just on the regulatory piece, I think it's interesting because obviously we've got the EU Act that's been released and publicised in the last few weeks. The UK did something last year. There's a lot of focus around generative AI, which more broadly, but then it's also going to have an impact on the different types of activity. So marketing will be covered. There will be other areas. And so it is an area I think we're doing more and more research on in terms of, because it will depend also on which geography you sit in, where your customers sit, that you're going to have to think about that. So really just setting the scene that actually regulations around Gen AI and then specifically for marketing will be something that we continue to do research on as we look at the implications to businesses as they start thinking about leveraging Gen AI, but also complying to regulation.
Definitely. Now, what we did speak about a couple of seconds back in terms of channels is the next discussion point for today. So Darshita, I know we've run through the survey and we've gotten a lot of insights in terms of the different channels. Can you walk us through the findings of the survey?
Sure, Nishant. But before we jump into the channels and the data around that, let's just talk a bit about the CMO budget. Now, we get this question a lot as to, what percentage of the actual company budget is the, marketing budget. And according to what we have read, researched, and collected in terms of the survey, currently it stands at approximately 10% of the total company budget, which is marginally above the pandemic level. However, when we talk about channels and where the CMO mind is at, it is everywhere. What you see on the slide is basically insights we collected when we asked the CMOs to choose the fastest growing and the most investment worthy channels within marketing for 2024. And as you can see, the responses don't really add up to 100%, which means that most CMOs chose more than one channel. So according to CMOs, and in fact, we also agree that there's really no right answer to this. And to break this data down further, the one thing that strikes the most is the contrast between social commerce, which is the most investment-worthy channel, and e-commerce, which is the least. It was quite surprising because social commerce is basically a subset of e-commerce, but I guess where it stems from is the fact that there is a shift in consumer behavior and time spent on different social media platforms now across all generations, which also actually justifies why affiliate marketing and influencer marketing are up there. Coming to in-game advertising, it is another interesting one, as CMOs are really trying to navigate smoother and more seamless ways to incorporate in-game advertisements without really ruining the overall player experience. And we have seen a lot of service providers as well investing in this, especially in their in-game advertisement services and then gamification of loyalty platforms. So, that one is justified up there. Now, in our interactions with CMOs and providers, we've seen that CTV is becoming a hot topic for investment. And with the cookie crumbling, retail media networks are becoming the new source of primary first-party data, which again is something that the CMOs struggle with, as we saw on the previous slide. So, the rise of retail media networks, I think, will be one of the solutions to that problem. Now, what's interesting is also that the conventional channels like email, digital out of home, audio, and e-commerce are still investment worthy as for the CMOs, but not so much of a priority anymore. And it could also be because they've now become run-of-the-mill activities for all these enterprises, while the new ones that offer more connected customer experiences bring that going above and beyond and that differentiation factor.
Anything that stands out? Because for me, I think a lot of these make sense. I would kind of assume the ranks to be slightly up or down, but anything that completely stands out that, we think would be dead and gone, but continues to thrive?
Yeah, Nishant, interestingly, I was surprised to see Metaverse still up there at number 6, in fact, because this hype sort of failed in the last year, and we didn't really hear much. There's always sporadic investments going on here and there around the Metaverse, but it was quite fascinating to see that CMO still consider it as one of the top investment priorities for 2024. I guess we'll just see some fresh new developments in AR, VR, and XR this year, and we should all look forward to those. This channel is not going down easy.
Yeah, and Nishant, maybe a question for you, just to give Darshita a little rest, which is a question, a couple of questions that have come in from the audience, one from Doreen and one from Tina, which are similar, which is, do we have a view of this? And maybe we don't, and we can be honest, but do we have a view between B2B and B2C? Because I think the comment was also, is there a difference between marketing a service versus marketing a consumer product? And Doreen was looking for the split of marketing budgets, because this looks very much like a B2C view. Do we have a B2B to B2C split? Or was that something that we'd have to do further work on?
We would need to kind of piece the data together to be able to send that across. Do we have the data? Yes. I might be able to kind of pull that together. But broadly, what we're seeing is across marketeers, both in the B2B and B2C channel, a lot of these topics kind of come up. Something like connected TV is seeing a little bit lower interest as of this point of time. But everything else more or less continues to stay the same in terms of B2B. What I will try doing is making sure that we circle back on what these exact numbers would look like for B2B and B2C. But broadly, the numbers are in shooting range of each other.
Okay, and maybe what we can do is let's push it out for our socials, and then people can see the answers there. So if you're not already connected with Everest Group, but you're on this webinar, then keep an eye on the socials. But if you have got a connection or want to email us directly, then we can always come back with that question. But yeah, I thought that was good to answer those two questions live, because they were very connected, and is an obvious question around B2B and B2C.
Yep, no, that's fair. So bringing the focus back to Darshita, and I can't think of a better way of framing this, but limited budgets, you need to channelize it somewhere. Is there a view on how we could channelize the selection of channels at this point of time?
Yeah, Nishant, we've actually built a framework around this that we keep refreshing as and when new channels pop up and new trends pop up. And this framework is essentially, built to help CMOs navigate the complex landscape of media channel investments. So what you see on the slide is basically a matrix that maps consumer relevance with the growth potential of each channel. And gradually, it uncovers 3 platform cohorts, 3 different channel cohorts, as we call them. In blue, we have the established channels where most marketing teams already have strong capabilities. They've now become business as usual, and growth is sort of saturating for these channels. The yellow ones are the niche marketing channels catering to very specific demographics. While their customer relevance is really limited, they're suited for CMOs who are targeting those specific audiences. And some of these channels also do exhibit a great growth potential. Like you see, live stream marketing is right up there. In-game advertising has a good growth potential. Influencer marketing, as we saw on the previous slide as well, is gaining a lot of traction, especially with social commerce now popping up. So those are the channels that cater to niche audiences. However, what we see in the middle are the channels that have a mix of that have a great mix of demographic presence, and they also exhibit significant growth. Retail media network, as we saw, is right on the top and is also justified by the data that we connected, followed by CTV, social commerce. These are all the channels that are actually providing connected customer experiences. And that is why they will now become the mainstream platforms of the future. And these are the channels that CMOs really need to watch out for in terms of their investments.
Thank you for that, Darshita. And sorry, go on.
No, I was just about to hand it over to you, that we've spoken about a lot of channels. So yeah, what's your insight on the future and how this will shape up?
Sounds good. So to be honest, and I hope I don't offend anyone with the caption of this slide, but to be honest, I think the conversation that we're looking at is beggars need to be choosers. If you had all the budgets in the world, you would spread them across all of the channels that you have available. But since you don't, you're going to start picking and choosing different cohorts. Now, out of all of the data that we're looking at, I think there are two major things that come out. The first is every marketer is trying to get to exactly where their customer is going to be. And that is going to start driving a lot of your marketing decisions in the near to medium term. The fact that we're seeing the metaverse, we're seeing audio, all of those come up is because CMOs at this point of time do believe that their customers are on those channels. They are going to start chasing them at different levels. And we are looking at finding those niche customers in each one of these cohorts and balancing that out with the run-of-the-mill marketing activities that you've always had, which is your social media advertising, your email reach outs, etc., etc. So that's one side of the conversation. The second and the more interesting side of this conversation is exactly which channels got selected, because those are the channels wherein your attribution in terms of marketing budgets to results is actually becoming much, much stronger. We haven't really stepped out completely, but broadly we are moving away from the halo effects and all of those slightly more bling terms in the marketing ecosystem, the vanity metrics that we've been seeing. And we're actually starting to turn around and say, for every dollar that I spend, what is the money that's actually coming in at this point of time? So the systems that we're seeing get set up, the kind of channels that people are choosing, all indicate that in the near to medium term, they're going to start seeing a rapid reallocation of budgets across different channels, which are going to be driven by real-time A/B testing and real-time insights on your customer that we haven't seen as of this point of time. So the next evolution of the marketing ecosystem is going to be extremely interesting and is going to be fascinating from everyone, from a customer to a CMO. With that, back to you, David.
Yeah, thanks, Nishant. So just want to make a quick offer to the audience here. So we've recently released a report called Pledging Allegiance to the Modern Consumer. And it looks at actually around loyalty programs and providing some insights for CMOs in terms of sort of the key aspects of modern loyalty programs and also the strategies you should be taking, and can be used to serve as a guide to customize your loyalty programs. And so we want to make that available to anybody who's on this webinar. So there will be a link in the chat that the team will put in. So if you're interested in receiving access to that, then please press on the link and we'll get you access. This isn't going to be, we're not going to hound you to have conversations, but we would like to have a conversation about the report if you're interested. But it's more of a way of just sharing some of the insights that we're producing in this space. So as I said, if you're interested, please press the link in the chat and we'll get you a copy of the report, and we'd be happy to have a follow-on conversation about it. So if we move on, so one more poll for the audience, if you don't mind, just again, give us some views as we move into the next topic around generative AI. But what we want to understand is, so in the future, where do you believe the primary competitive advantage in marketing will lie? Will it be in the advanced use of generative AI? Will it be the strategic prowess of how you leverage insights for your business? Is it integration of AI with human creativity? Or is it innovation in AI applications? And so be interested to get the view just in terms of where you see the competitive advantage that you're going to gain in the future. So again, and we've got some data that we'll share on it. So again, we've had a few people respond, so appreciate that. We've sort of getting up to nearly half the audience, which would be great if we can give it another maybe 30 seconds. So if you've not participated, we can try and get around 50%. It gives us a good sense, which is great. So yeah, give it 10 more seconds and we'll close the poll. That's great. So we can close the poll. So interesting response. So only 9% said that the advanced use of generative AI is going to be that key competitive advantage. Actually, 29% have said the strategic prowess in leveraging insights, but actually more than half have said integration of AI with human creativity, which is, I think, great. That's for me, is the way that we would want to leverage AI in all the areas that I cover from a research perspective. It's about combining the human with the power of the technology, not just one or the other. So that's great. I think that aligns to where I see the world going. But Darshita, I think you're going to share with us what we actually saw from the CMO survey. We can get into a little bit more detail.
Yeah, David. But before discussing the data on this slide, let's set some context in terms of a question that we often get asked by our enterprise stakeholders as to what percent of, what is the actual percentage use of generative AI in marketing? And I think the answer is very obvious. We've been hearing that quite a lot. Over 95% CMOs are leveraging generative AI in some shape, way, or form, either as a pilot use case or anecdotally or with the help of third-party LLM. In fact, over 40% CMOs are significantly using generative AI, with some even achieving end-to-end integration in their technology stack. So generative AI is quite out there in different capacities for different enterprises, for different use cases. While we set that context, what is actually interesting is also what's on the slide here. 9 out of 10 CMOs do think that generative AI will become the future and be a part of our lives from 10 years from now. And 8 out of 10 consumers agree with them. So generative AI is definitely here to stay, and we're seeing the ripple effects of everything that we've just spoken about right in the on the slide on the left-hand side. Generative AI has hit content the hardest. And it's actually not a surprise because it is a content generating platform. But some other use cases are definitely in customer research in terms of persona building, real-time insights. We've also seen a lot of automation happening for a lot of marketing support activities, lead generation, commerce, and campaign is one segment where people are still experimenting with generative AI. From our conversations with stakeholders, they do believe that there are high hopes from generative AI in that segment as well. It's just a little bit underexplored at this point of time, but it's definitely going to be useful in personalized campaign operations, real-time contextual campaigning. And lastly, media is that one segment where the impact of generative AI is still limited and yet to be explored further. However, when we ask CMOs about how they see their marketing talent mix evolving due to generative AI, the results were quite surprising. Only 17%, now we're on the right slide. Okay, yeah. So only 17% believe that there would actually be significant talent rebalance, while 57% CMOs believe that the change is going to be really moderate, and the rest predict minor to no change at all. So it's quite contrasting to the overall hype around generative AI and the potential and the power and the impact that it's about to create. But CMOs do believe that at least in the short to medium term, the impact on their existing human creativity, existing talent is going to be very moderate. Nishant, why do you think that is? And, how will this shape up in the longer term?
Thanks, Darshita. And I think this slide is actually very indicative and quite well aligned with the data that we actually collected on the poll just now as well. And what we're seeing indicates something very simple. It just says that the promised transformation in the marketing landscape is yet to be seen from the generative AI promise that we've been hearing for a very long time. Now, what's interesting about generative AI, like you mentioned, it's a content generation tool. A lot of different companies have turned around and said, hey, the data that we have is proprietary. We don't know how to use these platforms. All of those conversations have always been going on. When we talk about the marketing conversation, it's always been a conversation in terms of whether it's actually going to replace human creativity or not. From what we are seeing, the infinite intern is not going to be able to replace human creativity. What it is going to do is it's going to supercharge this conversation, because no one is expecting the generative AI platforms to be able to replace human ingenuity at this point of time. So it's just a supercharging as opposed to a superseding at this point of time. The second thing, and that's the part that from all of our research, we believe that a lot of different industries are not really realizing, is that the bar for success in the marketing conversation for generative AI is considerably higher. Marketing today is over 50% automated in different shapes, way, or forms. Generative AI cannot becomes a Me Too brand in all of these conversations and turn around and say, hey, I do exactly what X platform or Y platform does with a marginal improvement in terms of, say, efficiency or in terms of overall customer appeal. It needs to start providing a transformational change in terms of all of the activities that we're talking about. So if we look back, why is it impacting customer that significantly? That's because customer is one of those areas that hasn't seen a significant transformation in quite a while. The last major transformation, arguably, is probably Photoshop. So, so that industry obviously was ripe for transformation. Whereas when I talk about something like campaign management, any change that we are seeing today is just a marginal improvement. It's just slightly better than what's already in place. And marketers have already paid for the technology that they have over there. So what is going to start bringing this conversation ahead is a lot of your existing platforms are going to start integrating a lot of generative AI capabilities. They're going to start becoming better. And what we're going to start seeing is any platform that's going to start bringing together the platforms that already exist, first-party information, and the insights that it brings together with it, as well as real-time changes in terms of everything that's happening in the macro condition to provide that strategic differentiator, are the ones that are going to start moving forward and ahead in comparison to a lot of the other platforms that we have seen today. So if someone turned around and said, where does marketing stand in terms of its ability to adopt generative AI? It's actually one of the easiest places to adopt it. However, if I had to turn around and say it is the bread, butter, and jam of the marketing ecosystem, that conversation's a little bit down the road, and B, the bar for that is considerably high. With that, we come to an end of all of the content that we actually wanted to share with you. And that was by design. We wanted to leave the last 15 minutes open for any questions. We see that there are a lot of questions in the chat, and we'll start answering them. But if you have any others, feel free to drop them in, and we'll try our level best to answer all of the questions that are on our screen. So let me get started with the first question that I see over here that hasn't been answered. Insights into the role of AI played in the platform portfolio consolidation projections. Now,
yeah, sorry, Nishant, I was just trying to talk actually. Again, my machine seems to keep putting me on mute, even though I didn't know it was. I was going to ask the same question. I think that relates to, obviously, when we're talking about the consolidation, and the reason that one caught my eye is because you were just talking about AI. So it's really how has AI driven some of that consolidation effort? So I don't know what your view is on that.
Yeah, so I think broadly what we're seeing is from an efficiency perspective on the technology side, we're seeing consolidation across different platforms. So that conversation continues to move quite strongly, and we're seeing a lot of different tools and technologies come out, both from companies such as the Adobes of the world, as well as a lot of the service provider community as well. This is more to lock in their customers, but also improve the overall efficiency of this marketing ecosystem, and that's going to continue to evolve. Now, where we think the role of AI is going to be played is wherever we're seeing AI start to enable platforms to do the work that they've already been doing a little better. So we have a few examples, and we've actually run this as a separate research activity recently, but a lot of different places wherein, for instance, if you're writing a blog, specific focused LLMs that help you build out a more impactful title, or a more impactful call to action, or the text in itself, is starting to find its way into the different platforms and supercharge the ability of a marketer to actually write a blog article. So when we talk about something that is more in terms of how fast can a person write a blog. For someone who's actually using a little bit of more of a cookie cutter approach to these things, we've seen a 10x improvement in terms of number of blogs that a person can actually write, because that is the level of supercharging that we're actually seeing. So what we are expecting is that everywhere where the technology that exists today can be elevated is where generative AI is going to start playing a lot more of a role. It's not really a replacement in terms of a lot of the technology that we are seeing in the marketing ecosystem.
Thanks, Nishant. There's a question around regulations, around any big regulations we foresee impacting marketing, and it says EU on the end of the question. So I'm not sure if that's the examples are just EU or that's the question. I guess I would say from an EU perspective, then definitely the EU AI Act will have an impact. It's not just aimed at marketing, but will have an impact on all sorts of disciplines. Regulations is an area we don't necessarily have a lot of research on, but Darshita or Nishant, I don't know if you've got any views in terms of regulations that we're seeing that we are watching out for, or we feel are going to impact CMOs.
Well, I'll let everyone else chime in, but broadly, what we've been seeing in the marketing ecosystem is that there's a lot of regulation in terms of customer data that we think is going to start coming to fruition very, very soon. We actually have a couple of reports written on that as well, but then broadly, every country as of this point of time is coming up with some sort of regulation in terms of how they protect their customer information and what are the repercussions for enterprises. On that, all of the AI-oriented conversations that we are seeing will start playing a role. Now, the way this is going to start maturing as a conversation is an open dialogue, because what we're seeing is EU is taking a much harder stance in comparison to a lot of the other geographies. So the obvious assumption in terms of a lot of different industries is that everyone's going to start probably aligning towards the EU standard and then percolate that across different channels. But we have actually not seen that happen in the marketing ecosystem. So what we have seen is every company is going to start building specific guidelines based on the geography that they're operating in, EU being the harshest and the most complex, but every other market is going to start building out their platforms to make sure that they're able to cover as much of the local regulation as they can without hurting their ability to collect information and analyze it at a larger level. So if I had to pinpoint any specific regulations, I don't think we have that at our fingertips right now, but we could always circle back in terms of some of our marketing collateral on it.
Yeah, thanks, Nishant. So it's an ever moving target, isn't it, when you talk about regulations, and is very country specific or regional specific. I'm based in the UK. We've still got EU regulations, etc. So it is something that we do research on, but it's an ever moving feast. But we're happy to follow on with conversations. I wanna link a couple of questions, and I'm not doing them in order now. So if we don't get to your question, we will come back to you offline. But I want to clubber two questions together around the metaverse. So a comment was coming in, which is the metaverse number is interesting. What do we think is driving that? And I know we touched on that, but I don't know if Darshita or Nishant, you have more. And then another question which links to that, which is JPMC was one of the first to invest heavily in the metaverse with their lounge in Decentraland. Well, actually, what's the reality of spending by CMOs in the metaverse space? Again, just be interested to get the perspective on the metaverse and where we're seeing that spend.
Yeah, and first off, I think it's interesting to see a lot of familiar names in the chat. So thanks, guys, for logging in. Now, when we talk about the metaverse, I think the conversation around the metaverse is getting more realistic. I think the hype that we saw last year has died down. People are relating to the metaverse. Maybe people aren't really touching onto the metaverse as a term in itself, but they're going more broad in terms of its ability to have AR, VR experiences in a different ecosystem. So because the conversation is getting more realistic, people are turning around and saying, where are the areas that the metaverse actually starts impacting our customer experience? And the other example that has actually been quoted in terms of JPMC being a pioneer, it's actually a very interesting place to think about it, because JPMC created a virtual launch for everyone to come in and have an experience of being in a bank with a teller to do their financial transactions. Now, if we actually had to go back as individuals to think about the last time we actually went to the bank to actually have one of those transactions, I think we're talking about a few years back. We actually go there just because we have a complaint or we have something that their online presence cannot actually handle. So the lens that we are seeing a lot of CMOs start picking up today is the lens that they take for any other platform. How does this improve my customer experience? How does it help me hit newer customers? Do I have a specific niche customer set that's actually on this platform because of which I should be over there? Now, when you take that lens, you're actually starting to see a very different and a very niche customer set that still has a lot of allure to the metaverse. And that is who your CMOs are targeting. And that conversation is getting more realistic. How am I supercharging this experience for a customer? How am I increasing that stickiness for that customer by using the metaverse? It's a more realistic, it's a more pragmatic conversation. And honestly, it's something that's going across B2B and B2C experiences, because if I'm able to start building an experience that's going to resonate well with a B2B customer, in terms of my ability to demonstrate capabilities that I could not have on with a pamphlet or a video, that's where this conversation is moving. So it's a more realistic and a more executable vision in comparison to what we've been seeing.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just looking at a few of the other questions, just grouping them together. And maybe the learning for us is that we do more splits of B2B versus B2C, because there's quite a few questions
Definitely.
about how would this apply to B2B, how would this apply to B2C. But just going back to a more generic question, a question came in getting quite early around what industry do we think is investing most in marketing initiatives, specifically data analytics. So do we see that being driven by any specific industry, or is it across the board? Do we have a view on that? Does the data allow us to get to that level of granularity?
It does allow us to have that granularity. I don't think we have it at our fingertips, but then what we've been seeing is a lot of data analytics is actually going into heavily B2C oriented companies. B2B is definitely playing a role, but it's majorly your retail, FMCG industries that are driving a lot of your data analytics spends. But that's also something that we'll take back and see how we piece that conversation together. Maybe have a separate session to discuss those insights as well, because it looks like there are a lot of B2B oriented questions on our chat today.
Yeah, actually, yeah, I'll say B2B is an interesting one that's coming out quite loud and clear. Probably got time for one or two more questions. So let's just take the next one in order. During the survey, did we get any insights into what other considerations CMOs keep in mind when leveraging Gen AI for personalized marketing campaigns? So I know that we touched on Gen AI a bit, but did we pick up anything from the CMO survey, or what's our view in terms of, because we know there's things like data security and privacy and bias and all the things that are just generic Gen AI concerns, but is there anything specific from a CMO perspective that we've picked up in our work with CMOs?
Well, at this point of time, I wouldn't. So to answer the question first, from a survey perspective, no, we have not asked that question. The way we looked at it was trying to understand exactly where they are in terms of their maturity and their level of comfort in terms of a lot of the questions that come up on the talent side or in terms of the different initiatives that are going on. But when it comes to their ability to explore this market more specifically when it comes towards customization or personalized conversations, what we're seeing is that there's a lot of work that's going on in the pilot stages as of this point of time. Some examples are already in production, but then what they're trying to figure out is how do they toe the line between data that they have about their customers and the data that's available out there in the market. So we've seen some very, very good examples of using third-party information to actually reach the right customer, create right insights across social platforms, across creating biofeedback messages, etc. It's heavily on the third-party information. There's still a little bit of a concern around using first-party information, but that's something that over time will start reducing. So personalization using third-party information, something that we're seeing across the board. Using first-party information, a little bit on a sticky wicket right now.
Okay, great. And then one last question, Nishant, I think, and then we'll let people go. And it's from Rohit earlier on, and it was around what other channels marketers need or should explore to stay relevant, at the same time be customized for each set of accounts. So I'm guessing because we've talked about the channels that people could be leveraging, but are there channels that are maybe more customizable to certain sets of accounts? So again, do we have a view on that?
Well, I think that's a little bit of a tricky question, but the way I would look at it is you need to look at where your customer is today. So I know we've said that multiple times today on the call, but then every customer seems to have a niche channel that they actually subscribe to. You're probably going to end up selecting one of those channels and then selecting slightly more horizontal platforms. But that's probably the lens that you're going to be picking up in these conversations, as opposed to maybe what's the level of personalization across each one of these customers themselves. That becomes a little trickier to handle. Of course, there are a lot of channels that you can personalize the complete experience on, but then it's more of a customer fit conversation as opposed to the ability of the platform in itself.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nishant. So if we move on, just as we finish, just going to the next slide, just to show some examples. We've got a lot of content out there in the market that's free to access in terms of blogs that actually everyone can answer. So there's links in the deck to all of our blogs that we've done around marketing services and Gen AI and a whole host of topics. And then the next slide will just show some of the published reports that we've also got out in the market, which have been reports we've done in the last 6 months or so, really focusing on this space, looking at the marketing services providers, what some of the trends we're seeing, the state of the market, generative AI, the modern consumer, loyalty services that we touched on, which is the complimentary report we're giving away, but also around things such as safeguarding brand reputation. So whole host of reports that are out there. So I'd like to thank you all for coming today. Really appreciate the engagement and the questions. There are lots of ways of contacting us. Our contact details are out there. As I said, click on the link if you want access to the report, but please follow up if you've got any other questions, and we will follow up with any other questions that we haven't answered just to make sure you get them addressed. So thank you again very much for your time.